Welcome to Lesson 11 in the C# from Start to Finish course. My name is Tim Corey, and today we're going to be looking at how to save data to text files. In the last video, we wired up our connection to SQL. We also did a few housekeeping things that hopefully will set us up for success going forward. Now, we need to make the text connection work like the SQL connection does, in that we take in a prize model and we return a prize model with that ID filled out. So let's look at how to do that. Before we get started in the lesson, I want to remind you to subscribe to this channel. If you are subscribed, click the little bell icon and make sure you're getting the alerts when I add a new video. And while you check on that, could you also give this video a like? I know that we're just getting started, but liking a video is a simple way that you can make this course more popular, and that helps everyone. It increases the visibility of my videos on YouTube, which generates more income for me. It helps others out because they get introduced to this valuable content, and it helps you out because I'm able to produce more free videos. Okay, so let's get back to the lesson. Here we have our solution. We can go directly to the text connector inside the data access folder. And this is what we need to wire up. So right now, this is the sample code. And just like before, we're going to delete that out. Now, again, just like with a SQL connection, the very first thing we need to do is figure out where we're going to store these text files. Now, it is plural. We're going to store our data in more than one text file. My thought is that for each one of these models, so matchup entry model, matchup model, and all the rest, for each of these, we're going to store them in their own text file. So essentially, it's a list of that item in each file, or if you think of it in SQL terms, it's one table per text file. And text files are really cheap to make, and that's the best way of putting data in a way that's efficient in getting it back out and not confusing one with another. So we're going to store our information in multiple text files, and in this case, we'll store the prize information in the prize text file. So we need to know where to store these files. And so instead of storing a file name, we're going to store the path to where all the files go. And then all the files will be in one folder path. And that seems a little bit like the connection string. So we'll actually store this information in the same spot. So we'll go over to the app.config of the Tracker UI project. And here we have our connection string, and we're going to, in here, add a new section under configuration and call it app settings. Inside app settings, we're going to add, say, key equals file path. And the value equals, and in my case, that value equals this path right here. So C:/data/tournament tracker. No slash at the end of that. So it depends if you want to put the slash there or not. We're going to have to add that slash in when you put a file name, but I like to have this without the slash because that would be the more correct syntax for Windows. So let's leave it like that. So this now is the key and the value. So it's a key value pair, kind of like a dictionary object. So we'll be able to look up based upon this name and get this value, just like we look up by this name and get this value. The only difference is this is more generic, just any app setting, whereas this is specific to a connection string. So back over here in our text connector class, we need to start wiring up the helper methods that will allow us to talk to those text files. But before we start writing code, let's work on the plan. And I'll show you what my plan is. So here, when you say write a prize, create a prize, so save that created prize to the text file, what I'm going to do is first read the text file of the prizes. I'm going to load all the text or the prizes that are currently in that text file. And the reason for that is because I need to know what the new ID is going to be. Unlike SQL, text files don't create auto-incrementing IDs. So I'll load all the prizes up. I'll read through to find what's the highest ID and use the highest ID plus 1 as the new ID. So I'm first going to load the text file. Then I'm going to convert the text to a list of prize model. And from there, I'm going to find the ID, add the new record with the new ID, and then finally, I am going to convert the prizes to a list of string. And from that, I'm going to save the list of string to the text file. Okay, so that's a lot of work, but when you're talking about text file data access, you're going to need to do some work. And that's just what it comes down to, because text files are not the intelligent systems that a relational database is. They're pretty much just stupid. And so we have to be the smart ones. With SQL, we rely a lot on SQL smarts. But with text files, it's all on us. So in this case, we're going to load in the text file, and that's going to come in as a list of string. We're going to convert that list of string to a list of prize model. We're going to find the ID, the maximum ID. We'll even say max here. We'll add the new record with that new ID, which is the max plus 1, to our list. We'll take that list then, the list of prizes, and convert it to a list of string. And then save that list of string back to the text file, overwriting what was currently there. Seems kind of simple, right? Now, these steps right here, each of them is going to be a different action, and we're going to try and keep these separate because loading the text file, that isn't based upon which type of model you're using, in this case, prize model. We just load the text into a list of string, which means that we don't have to limit that code just to this method. Converting the text into a list of prize model, yeah, it's pretty much limited to just this method. There are ways and tools we could do if we got really complicated, where we could have one method convert anything to any kind of list. And if you want to pursue that path, I would recommend using a tool like AutoMapper to map from one type of object to another. Next, the find the max ID. That's pretty simple. We'll use some the link queries in order to get us the max ID. Adding the new record is just adding one to a list, but then converting that prizes to a list of string, that's going to be a custom to this type of model. But then this right here again is something that any method can do, which is save a list of string to a text file. So you got to kind of break these apart, first of all, so that each method does one thing and does it well. And then also so that other methods can use the methods that are kind of generic, the ones that don't really rely on a specific model type. Now to do this, I'm actually going to create a new class. And there's a lot of different ways you could do this new class. There's a lot of different places you could put it, and there's not seemingly a great place to put it. I'm going to put it right in data access because it kind of fits with data access. It's just as more data processing. And it's related specifically to the text connector. So I'm going to add a new class. And I'm going to call this text connector processor.cs. Now this is in the in the tracker library.dataAccess namespace right now. I'm actually going to change that namespace. I'm going to say .dataaccess.textConnector. And the reason why I changed that namespace is because I don't want everyone to get cluttered up with what I'm going to do in here. So I'm going to give it a separate namespace so that only people that have that using statement get the extra clutter this is going to create. And I'll show you why in a minute, but the key thing to point out here is these namespaces, they're really anything you want them to be. You can change them however you want as long as it's a valid string. I would stick with just letters and the dots to separate. Trying to go crazy with special characters, that can just make things ugly. But in this case, I'm going to say .textConnector. This class, I'm going to make it public static class TextConnector processor. And that's a mouthful, that's okay. The very first method I'm going to put in here is a public static string full file path. Takes in a file name. And what this method does, or is going to do, is it's going to take in the file name. Now the file name would look something like, let's go to prizemodels.csv. That would be the file name. What this is going to do is take that file name and return back the entire path. Remember that in the app.config, we have this c:/data/tournament tracker. That's the path where all of our files can be located. And currently, just so you know, that's an empty folder right here. So right now it's empty, but once we start saving things, we'll start seeing files appear here for each of our different models. So this one right here, it's going to take this, it's going to prepend this right here. So it's going to put this first, then put a slash, and then put whatever you pass in for the file name, in this case, prizemodel.csv. How do we do that? Well, this is actually pretty simple. I'm going to OneLine this. I'm not always a fan of OneLine. Here's why. When you do things in OneLine, it's hard to debug because with OneLine, it does everything inline and you can't see what the value is at any one step as easily. But in this case, it makes sense. So I'm going to do that. Return. Give me my $sign syntax, which this allows us to concatenate strings together, put them together, kind of, add them together easily in a way that's more intuitive and also more performant. So I'm going to just put my semicolon at the end just so I'm complete before I go back and start writing in here. I'm going to start off right away with my curly braces and say configuration manager. And it says, nope, I have no clue. So I control dot and say using system.configuration. So configuration manager dot app settings, file path inside quotes, and then inside those square brackets, file path, close curly brace. So what this does right here, this section, is it goes out and says, okay, configuration manager dot app settings. Well, that just happens to refer to these app settings. And it says, here's the key. Remember, it's a dictionary. So here's the key. And it's just going to say, okay, gonna look for that key. Oop, found it. I'll return the value. So that value comes in place of this. So now we have that c:/data/tournament tracker. After the curly brace, we need a slash. But here's the kicker. Inside of a string, if you put a slash, that's the escape character. What the escape character allows us to do is to escape out of that string to put a special item. But we don't want that. What we want is a slash. Now, if we weren't If this is a regular string, we could put the @ symbol in front of the string, and it would say, no, everything inside a string is just text. It's not a special character or escape character. But in this case, we can't because we're using the $sign. So instead, we have to say // because now we are escaping. This is the escape, the first one. The second one is what we're escaping. So it's saying, treat this next thing as a real string, and it's the /. So essentially, this will translate into 1/. All right. Next, we're going to put the curly braces again, right after, no space. We're going to say file name. We'll take that extra space out at the end. So file name is the file name we passed in. So in this case, what we do is we start off with C:/data/tournament tracker. That's this right here. Then we have this // which boils down to 1/, like so. Then we have the file name. The file name is prizemodels.csv. And that looks like a valid file path and name. And it is, except for one fact, and that is the file doesn't exist yet. And that's no big deal. So we'll take our comments out here. So this method, all it does is it says, you have a file name? Cool. I'm going to give you the full path. And in fact, we can change this to say this. So now it says this string file name. And what does that do? Well, now this becomes an extension method. And so anytime we have a string, since it says this string, that means that we're attaching to this string right here. And it says, okay, that's whatever we're passing in goes into file name. So it's going to say whatever string we have dot full file path, open close paren, will return the name of the file in the full path. So again, that's C:/data/tournament tracker /prizemodels.csv. And this will be a little easier to understand when you see it. If you're confused about extension methods, I do have a video on my YouTube channel that will help you out with that. And we're going to use a couple more of these. And this is the reason why I have this special namespace that only this file uses. Because I don't want this extension method everywhere. Otherwise, if I'm in my SQL connector and I have a string and I put a dot at the end, it's going to say full file path. Well, that makes no sense. The SQL connector doesn't need to have this text file manipulation stuff. The only place it really needs to have this is the text connector class. But in order to have these extension methods, I have to have a separate class, and it has to be static class, and each method in here that's a extension method has to also be static. So that's why I had to create the separate text connector processor.cs and why it's static and static. All right, so that gets us started by saying, okay, in here, we're just going to pass in the name of the file, which we can hard code if we want, to say prize models. So we can pass that in, and it's going to give us the full path to that file. Before we leave this right here, we need to add another extension method, public static, and this is going to return a list of string. And this will be load file, and we're going to say this string file. And what this will do is it will take in the full file path, which we're going to get from here. It's going to take that and it's going to load that string. Now let's grab this over here. Let's grab this right here, because it'll be easier to see when it's in here. All right, so this right here, load file, corresponds to this first entry right here, load the text file. All right, so first thing we need to do is check to see if this file right here exists. Remember I said that this folder is empty, and that's okay, which it really should be. We don't want to create these empty files for everything we need. We want to let the system do that. So the first thing to do is say if not file, not lowercase file, uppercase file. And it says I don't know what that is, so I do my control dot and say using system.io. If not file.exists, file. Okay, so what that is, oops, there we go. What this is, it says this method right here, file, which is built into Microsoft, it's in the system.io namespace. So if system.io.file.exists. So the exists returns a Boolean, a true or false. We pass in the full path to the file, and it's going to check to see if that file already exists. And I'm saying if it doesn't exist, that's the not in front of it. If not exists, now if that confuses you, or if you really think you might skip over this, you can most definitely take this out, and at the end here, before the last paren, put double equals false. If file exists equals false. Okay, it's the same thing. And in fact, there's no performance hit to doing this versus the not. Therefore, if that's what you're comfortable with, please by all means do that. You will see, got rid of my F there, you will see this more commonly in the production environments of businesses. It's just a more accepted syntax because it's a little cleaner, a little tighter, and it's what we do. So you're going to see this, and a lot of people will swear by this and say that's the only way you do things. It really doesn't matter, except if you're trying to match somebody else's standards. If you're just learning how to develop, do what's going to make sense to you. Okay, that's my little soapbox. Just do what makes sense to you. Don't get suckered into the, well, this is the best practice for when I'm an Uber developer. That's great, but if it's going to limit you from becoming a good developer, don't do it. Do what's going to get you to the next level. Don't try and jump 4 levels up all at once. Okay, so the file does not exist. We can't read from it. In that case, return new list of string. But if the file does exist, we're going to bypass this right here and come down here. And we're going to say return file dot read all lines. Again, baked right in. Here's the file. The last thing you need to do is say to list, open, close paren, and semicolon. So now this method takes in that full file path and returns back a list of string. And that list of string represents all the lines in the file. The first line is in the first value, the first entry in the list, and down it goes. So that is this right here. Next, we need to convert the text to a list of prize model. Now, this is going to be a method that is specific to prize model. We're not going to have a generic method for this, but I'm still going to put it in this file here because it makes sense from a standpoint of I'm going to use it as an extension method. The eventual goal here is I want to be able to chain these together so I can read it very easily, where it's going to say, give me the full file path of this file, and then load that file, and then convert that file to a list of prize model, and so on and so forth. So down here, I'm going to say public static list of prize model. I have to use my using statement, so control dot and then hit enter. And we'll call this convert to prize model. Let's make it plural, prize models. And say this list of string lines. So it's going to take in a list of string. Where would I get a list of string? Well, that's the lines from the text file right here. It's going to spit out a list of prize model. That's the eventual goal. Now, again, it's an extension method on the list of string type. So here's how this works. We're going to start off with our output. List of prize model is our output. And we'll initialize that output. Then we're going to say a for each. String line in lines. When you're doing a for each, it's okay to have a single letter if you want, and we'll probably do that at some point. But just to make things shorter, because you know what it is. It's a line in the lines, especially when you have user in users. That gets a little confusing. So I might do user u in users. But in this case, we'll use line. That's fine. And it's a string. So now I'm going to say string array. I'll say calls for columns equals line.split on single quotes here, not double quotes, and a comma in between. What am I doing here? Well, if you watched my text files video, you'll know that for each line, I'm going to have it comma separated, like a CSV file. In fact, we're saving it as a CSV file. We'll see that in a minute. But for each line, I'm going to have these entries separated by commas. So I will split the values. I will split the line on the comma value. And that's going to put it into an array of string called calls. And now I can say prize model, I'll call it P, equals new, not sure why I did models.prize model, but you can take that off. And we will say P.id equals calls array position 0. And you may say, how do I know that we're at array position 0? Well, because that's the first one I write, that's the first column. You're going to have to know what your columns are and how they line up. And that's a little ugly, but that's what we're going to have to do. Now, it's going to yell at me here because this is a string. I'm trying to put it into an integer value. Now, there's a lot of ways we can deal with this, but remember I said that we're going to deal with exception handling in a different video, but that sometimes you want your application to crash rather than trying to make it limp along with half-formed data. In this case, that's exactly what I want to have happen. I don't want to worry about trying to protect the application from crashing. I'll let something higher up the food chain handle that. And instead, I'm going to crash if things don't work, which means I can say int.parse, and then in parens, put this string. Now, int.parse is going to take the string and convert it to an integer. And as long as that's like a 1, 2, or 3, some kind of integer, that'll work. If it has the value of Frank in that field, it's going to crash the application because Frank is not a number. So that's just something to keep in mind. This is going to crash if the data is not correct. Now, who writes this file? Only this application, in theory. So when this application reads from this file, it should be correct data. But you never trust things to go as planned. But in this case, it's going to have to blow up until I can put some exception handling in that's a little more intelligent and probably farther up the line, because I want this whole method to crash if it can't convert one line. Because if there's bad data there, we've got a big problem. We need to stop right where we're at. We can't continue on with half good data. All right, P dot, the next thing in line, the next column would be the place number. And the place number is also an integer, so int dot parse calls 1. Next, we've got p dot place name, and that's a string, so that's easy. Calls 2. P dot prize amount. Now, prize amount is a decimal because it's money. So therefore, we say decimal dot parse calls 3. Again, same thing. If it's not a decimal, it's going to break. P dot prize percentage. That's a double. So double dot parse calls 4. So there we have our model being built based upon the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns in this text file. And again, they have to be in the correct order and they have to have good data. And at the end of all of this, we say, we take our list, output dot add p. And then at the very end, we return output. And so what's happening is we're going to loop through every line in our text file. And you may say, whoa, 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 we don't have a text file yet. So what are we looping through? Well, remember we said return that new list of string. Essentially, a list of string that's initialized but has no records. Therefore, when we say for each line in the list, well, there's no lines. Therefore, we skip right over and return the output, which is an empty list of prize model. Perfect. Now we can come back up here and look at convert the text to a list of prize model. Done. Now we need to find the max ID. Well, that seems like something that the method in the text connector could do, since we're doing an insert, and an insert is unique to needing to have that ID, because an update would already have the ID, and it's just going to change some values in that row. So therefore, that's pretty unique to this create prize right here. Therefore, we're going to put the logic in here. So how do we put this logic in? Well, first we need to add the namespace. And the namespace is tracker library.dataaccess.textConnector. I'm going to copy that. Let's come over here and say using that namespace. And immediately I notice I have a problem. Tracker library.dataaccess.textConnector. Does that sound familiar? How about tracker library.dataaccess.textConnector? So now my namespace is the same as a class name. Would that survive? Sure. We just couldn't use a using statement. But that doesn't really seem like it's a helpful thing for me. So instead, I'm going to say, let's change this namespace. Again, we can change these at will. Text helpers. And so now I can come over here and say, it's not text connector, it's text helpers. That looks better. Okay, here we need to start working with our file. So first I'm going to come up here to the class level. All right, we're going to say private const string. We're going to call it the prizes file equals prize models.csv. Now what is this? Well, it's a private constant, meaning this value, the value inside this variable right here, will never change. It's going to be prize models.csv forever. So now I can take this variable and use it as a constant wherever we go, and we know that it's the same value everywhere, and we didn't accidentally overwrite it somewhere. It's also a little more efficient. That's the const, making it a constant. Now the notation is a little different in the fact that it's private and it's a variable of a type, but yet we have the Pascal notation of the uppercase first letter of every word, not just the first letter of the second word, with the first one being lowercase. So typically if this was a private string, this would be a lowercase p. Because it's a private constant string, the notation is uppercase. I'm not a huge fan of that just because it is a little confusing with anything public. You know, these things are publicly used, and so we do methods, we do class names, we do namespaces, and they're always Pascal notation, whereas private variables are always the camel case, where the first letter is lowercase and all the other first letters of words are uppercase. So it's not a favorite, but at the same time, this is the most preferred way in the industry of doing things. And I typically try and keep my style as close as possible to industry standards or the generally accepted practices, just because it's much, much easier than to transition into a new location and not have to change my style dramatically. So with that being said, prizes file. And that's the location where we're going to store our prizes. Now I could say the full path right there, but what would that do for me? Well, it'd lock me down to that particular path unless I change code. Whereas right now, in the app config, we can change that at any time and relocate where our files are. That means we can actually put our files onto a network share or onto a different drive entirely, and this application would still work just by changing the app.config location for file path. So we want to keep this as it is, and we'll have a few constants here, one for every model, but I'm not going to add them now. I'm going to add them when I need them. Just makes more sense that way, and you don't accidentally create duplicates. So with that being said, I need to take my prizes file dot, and this is where we're going to use our extension methods. Our first extension method is the full file path. So dot full file path. That's an extension method. And I don't pass anything in because it's going to take the first value, the one that says this, from this string right here. So that's going to convert that to a full file path. But I'm not done. I then hit dot. And now that I have a full file path, I can do this load file. So Control J to pull this back up. Load file. Which file? Well, the full file path of this file. I don't pass anything in because that's this value right here is what gets passed into here. And then I say dot convert to prize models. So it takes this list of string that comes out. We're going to convert that to prize models. And do I pass in anything? No, because that list of string is all I needed. Open, close. And now at the very beginning, I can say list of prize model prizes equals, and have that full section right there. So it takes the prize file, it finds the full file path, it loads the file, it converts that to a prize model list, and returns that to my variable. See how kind of compact that is, and yet it's also readable, and yet it's doing 4 different things. Well, 3 different things, 3 different methods on that data, and it's chaining it all together. So now I have in OneLine my list of prize model from my text file. Next, I need to, and that's these 2 lines right here are now done. And in fact, I could just take this and put them right above, load the text file, and convert the text file to a list of prize model. So there's the first 2 steps done. Now for this next one, I'm going to say int current ID equals prizes dot order by descending. So I'm going to order this list descending by x equals greater than x dot ID. So what this does is it takes my list and it says, okay, I'm going to order by descending by the ID property. So if I have 2 records, one of the ID property of 1 and one of the ID property of 2, 2 is greater than 1, therefore 2 comes first because we're going 2 then 1 because that's descending order. So now I have my list ordered, but that's not good enough because that's not an integer. Instead, I then say, give me my first value. And what does that do? It gives me that first record, which is the record that has the highest ID. And then I say dot, in the list I have ID. And I'll say +1. What that does is it finds the ID of the highest ID in the list. So if we have 3 IDs in our list of prizes, ID of 1, 2, and 3, it's going to find the record the ID of 3, and then get just that ID, so then it's just a 3. And we're going to say 3 plus 1. Now the current ID is 4. And that current ID is the one we're going to use to write the new record. So I'm going to say model, and that's what we're passing in right here, model.id equals current ID. Now, to be totally complete, what you should do then is say current ID plus equals 1, meaning now the ID is moved up 1 because we've used that ID. And that would be in case you wanted to write more than 1 record at a time to this list. But in this case, we don't, so we'll go ahead and not add that extra code since it's not necessary. And now we have our record we want to add, so we say prizes.add model. So we've added our new model with the new ID to our list of prizes. So that's find the max ID. We're going to grab that, and we'll put that there. And we're going to add the new record with the new ID, and that's right there. And now we need to convert the prizes to a list of string and save the list of string to a file. That sounds like we're going back to our text connector processor and doing some more work. And writing will be a little bit easier in the fact that we'll just do one method and we'll do everything. Just because writing is so easy. We're going to say public static, and we'll say void because there's nothing we need to return. We're just going to write these files. We're going to call this save to prize file. Call it save to prize file. We're going to pass in this list of prize model. We'll call it models. And then we have to pass in also the file name. Okay, so we passed in our list of models, and that's our this is an extension method based upon this list of models. So therefore, when we're over here, we can say prizes dot save to prize file and just pass in the file name. So now we have this list. We can say we need to convert this to a list of string. So list of string lines equals new. Wow, messed that up. List of string lines equals new list of string. That's better. Then we're going to do a for each. And this is going to be a for each on our prize model. I'm going to call this P in models. So I called it P because I want it to be as short as possible because of how I'm going to have to create this entry. Now I have this list of string here, and C# is great about writing a list of string to the database, so I will use this, but I have to add a line for every single model. So I'm going to say lines.add. I'm going to do my $ double quote syntax, and I'll put my semicolon at the end and come back here. Now, what's the first thing? P.id, comma, make sure not to put spaces where it's actually going to count it. Keep the spaces limited to inside your curly braces if you want to use them at all. Next we have p.placeNumber. And the order is important here. Remember, this order here is the order up here. So you can even look up here for your kind of a cheat sheet. That's always a good thing to double check. So next is p.placeName. And then comma, p.prizeAmount, comma, p.prizePercentage. So I have the ID, a comma, the place number, a comma, the place name, a comma, the prize amount, a comma, and the prize percentage, no comma at the end. And that's how you do a comma separated line. Now it's going to loop through every line in my list of models. And so now at the end of that, I have a list of string that represents all of my models. So now all I do is say file.write all lines. And it's going to ask for two things. First of all, the path. So I'm going to say file name. You're going to say, but wait, that's not the path. No, it's not. Now we have to say file name dot, and what's it's full file path. So Control J down here to open that list back up. Full file path, that's the file name. And the contents is, right now, if you look, it says it's a array of string, but if you do this little arrow here, you can see it's IEnumerable of string. If you keep going, you can see other options as well. We're going to use this second one, the IEnumerable of string. And list is an IEnumerable, therefore list will work. Let's zoom back out here. We can say lines. And guess what? That's all we need to do. So we take our models and our file name. We take the models, we convert them to a list of string. We take our file name and convert that to the full file path. Then say write all lines. Here's a full file path, and then here are your lines to write. And we're done. And with that, we come back over here. We can actually just move this up. And then right under here, we call this the save to prize file. Oops, let's not do that. I accidentally double clicked here and it popped it into a new window, which will allow you to drag it to a second monitor if you want. I use that quite frequently when I'm trying to both read something like this right here. I'm reading save to prize file and I'm coming back over here and using that. Because I try to remember things, I try to make sure and double check and verify by reading. It just makes a whole lot less of a mess later when you go, oops, I forgot that, or I transposed something. So I just don't remember things intentionally. I actually go back and double check. So I could drag this tab into a different monitor and read it while I type. But in this case, with one monitor, it's not as easy to do, so I'll just go ahead and go back and forth. I could also split these, right-click on a tab and say New Vertical or Horizontal Group, and that'll allow me to see two files at once. But in this case, I'm just going to come back over here and say Save to Prize File. Okay. And so I'm going to say prizes dot save to prize file. It does take something in because we have two parameters. The first one comes from here, the prizes. The second one is the file name. And what's the file name? Well, it's the prizes file. And notice the little icon right here indicates that it is a constant. So, with that being said, we have now saved our prizes back to our text file. We've overwritten that text file. You see back over here, this write all lines. If you notice the comment, what it does, it says it creates a new file, writes the collection of strings of the file, and then closes it. It writes a new file, meaning it's going to overwrite the file that's already there. So if you didn't want that, that'd be different. But in our case, we want to blow the original file away, start over. So now we're almost done. We have this red squiggly here, and it says, hey, you're not returning a value. What is the value to return? Well, return model. Why? Because the model is what we added that ID to, and now it's the prize model fully formed with that ID. So now you can refer to anything else we do by that ID, and we'll know we mean this particular record. Now, how do we know this is going to work? Well, we need to test it. Again, we'll cover unit testing in a future video, but for now, I want to get into actually just running this thing. So let's come down to our program.cs, and we have this initialized connection. We're going to use a data type of SQL. No, we're not. Control J. We're going to use the text file instead. Now we're saving the text files. Again, there's nothing in here in any of these text files. There's no text files. So let's start this application. And it's going to start off screen like it always does. And I'll pull it over. I'm going to open my folder here and just put it next to it. And I'm going to say place number is, let's give it place number 2. Place name of second place. And the prize amount is 50. Create prize. And it blows up on us. Excellent. And it says, sequence contains no elements. Wah wah. Why is this a problem? Well, we said we didn't care if our text file was not there because we would just add that first model to our list and then save that list of 1. But we have a problem. We're trying to get the ID. And we're assuming, and that's where you get into trouble, we assumed that our list of prizes had at least one record. We could then sort by the IDs. It does not when there are no records. How do we fix this? Well, first we stop. And then we say, let's copy this. I'm going to say that this equals 1. And then I'm going to come down here and do an if statement. If. And I'm going to say prizes dot count is greater than 0. So what I've said is the initial value of the ID is 1. Now normally the initial value would be 0. But I want it to be 1 because if the prizes.count, the length of our list, is 0, meaning this is false, it will not do this, and it will put the ID of the current ID, that'd be 1, into the model.id. So it'll be the first record. Now over here you see that I have the value plus 1. Think of this as 0 plus 1. That would be the equivalent of what I'm doing down here. But it's kind of silly to do math on an assignment like this when I can just do that. So that's why I'm going to do that. That should take care of our bug. So now if the prizes count, the number of records and prizes is not 0, we're going to find that ID. Otherwise, we'll skip over it and put the ID of 1 into model.id. Let's run that again. I'll bring up my folder and also my file, and I'm going to do this again and say, let's do third. I always like to change the value that I test from the previous crash just to make sure that the old crash information didn't somehow slip into. Now, that's the wrong place for third. That should be 3, and this should be third. And the prize amount for this we'll say is 25. We're going to create prize. And look at that. We have a file over here. And if you notice on my system, it says, hey, that's a Microsoft Excel file. It's actually a Microsoft Excel comma separated values file. Well, sure it is. But I'm actually going to open this with Notepad. And look, we have 1, that's the ID. 3, that's the place number. Third is the place name. 25 is the prize amount. And 0 is the prize percentage. That's awesome. We're going to close it back out, and we're going to say 2 for second. Place name is second. Prize amount is 50. We'll leave prize percentage alone. We'll create that. We're going to do it again for first. Prize amount is 100. We'll create that, and I'm going to create fourth place just to exercise my prize percentage. And we're going to say this is 5%. And create the prize. Let's open this up again. Open with Notepad. And look, I have 4 records. Notice the IDs are 1, 2, 3, 4. The second column is not the ID, that's the place number. 3 for third, 2 for second. Let's zoom in here. 1 for first and 4 for fourth. Notice that the first 3 have the value of 25, 50, and 100 in this column right here, whereas the fourth place does not have a value in that column, it has a 0. And instead, we have a 5 in our percentage column. So it's working. We're saving our values to our text file. And in fact, we could open this up in Excel if we wanted to and actually add new columns. I would recommend that you be careful with that because this is very strict about how it puts values in. And if you make a mistake with a typo or adding an extra column or something weird like that, you might actually cause an issue where your application crashes. So let's not crash our applications just yet. We'll do that later when we're trying to work with exceptions. In the meantime, we now have a working application that can either save to our text file or to SQL. Before we go, I want to point out that in our text connector, we have all of these extension methods. So this is a string.fullFilePath. But if I were to go to a SQL connector and come in here and just give a string, whatever it is, test, and then say .fullFilePath, it's going to say, no, I have no clue what that is. If I hit Control dot, it's going to say add the using statement for trackerlibrary.dataaccess.textHelpers. Now I'm not going to do that, but that just goes to show that all those extension methods aren't on our values, our strings and our lists and all the rest, they're not there unless we add that using statement. Let's just get all the way out of there. All right, so unless we add our using statements, which up here we have our using statement, when we add this using statement, we get all these extension methods. When we don't get them. And that's actually a really good benefit, because as we go on, if we have lots of these extension methods, we can double and triple the size of that list of possible options, and we might even step on our own toes where we have two methods with the same name that do something different. And so the best way to make sure that we keep those separate is to keep them in separate namespaces and only pull in the namespaces of the extension methods we really need. So with that being said, we've actually done a lot of groundwork. These two lessons right here are going to set us up really well to move forward with our other forms. And this is where we start to actually make some visible progress and get our app kind of off the ground a little bit more. So make sure you stick around for that. Before you go, you'll see a link on the left to buy this course. Check out the intro video on this playlist for more information about what you get if you pay. Also, if you are ever wondering what you could do to help this channel out without paying money, I've listed 6 things that really help. I'd appreciate if you consider doing one or more of these. Thanks again, and don't forget to keep practicing what you learned.